Zelensky, in an interview with The Economist, said that to convince governments to make them believe they are on the right side is by pushing them using the media. People read, people discuss, people make up their minds, and people push. People will not forgive their leaders if they lose Ukraine. What this guy is thinking of?
Yeah, it's just a sign of growing desperation. The war has gone very, very badly. All of the high hopes they held for the counteroffensive against Russia have blown up in their face. And it's not just Zelensky, because there are a lot of American military planners and other Europeans with NATO who genuinely believed that this counteroffensive would meet little resistance from Russia, and that Russia would have little ability to respond and to stop it and to retaliate. I mean, it could, one of the, it's a historical error. There's just a bad miscalculation, bad analysis, and candidly, I don't know how they could be that off, because myself and others like Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter had predicted early on that this had little chance of succeeding, primarily because they had lost their air defense capabilities. So that meant Russian aircraft were going to be able to come to the front lines and provide a counterpunch to any offensive effort. And then Ukraine itself didn't have an air power. So how in the name of God are you going to attack entrenched positions when all you're relying upon is ground forces and a little bit of artillery? It's never been done in history. It's an impossible task, and Ukraine has proven that to be the case.
There is an article in Financial Times. They're talking about the hard lessons from Ukraine's summer offensive. This article listed some lessons to be learned from this counteroffensive. They're trying to put the blame on the Zelensky administration and Ukrainians. Do you think it's all about Zelensky and his administration, or the people who are behind the scene are responsible for this failure?
No, I think it's primarily the people behind the scenes. You have a situation in which the American generals and the generals in NATO are doing war plans and providing guidance on something none of them have ever done in their entire career. Okay, they have never been involved with a war. They say, "Well, wait a second, we fought in Iraq." You went up against, a third-rate army that was, not well equipped, not well trained, did not have an air force. And in Afghanistan, you didn't even have a fixed army. You had the Taliban, you had insurgents, you had villagers with AK-47s and some mortars. And the United States wasn't able to beat them. So now jump ahead, they take on Russia, which has an actual real army. It has electronic warfare capabilities, air defense, combat aircraft, both fixed wing, rotary wing. And they have planned whatever weaknesses and problems there have been in the previous Soviet army, the Russian army has corrected. And, the Russian army has actual plans for defending the motherland, which is exactly what this special military operation is all about. They faced a threat from the West, and they were going to stop it.
If instead of Ukrainian soldiers, we had German soldiers, we could have something different from what we've seen.
No, because again, what Ukraine had a year ago at the start of the special military operation was probably it was the best or one of the best armies in Europe. It had been trained for 9 years by NATO. So they had an experienced officer corps. They had experienced soldiers. They were not just taking people off the street and putting a uniform on them. So at the start of the special military operation, the West genuinely believed that Ukraine had a decided advantage, that they believed that the Ukrainian troops were better prepared, better led, better equipped. than the Russian forces. Well, that turned out not to be the case. Nonetheless, the Ukrainian soldiers were very capable, but they got killed because the Russian advantage in artillery and in combat aircraft and in both the rotary wing and the fixed wing aircraft, they killed in a lopsided manner the Ukrainians. So for every 1 or 2 Russians that died, there were 10 or 12 Ukrainians dying. And that started causing attrition in the ranks. So that army that existed in February of 2022 really did not exist by June, July of 2022, which meant then they had to start sending in replacements. And the replacements were coming in with, they did not have the training, they did not have the experience. And so right there, you get a deterioration, a degradation in competence and efficiency. And then in the course of the next 6 months, again, that army got chewed up. And so now Ukraine is bringing in people who have even less time, less training. And those have now been wiped out in the course of this latest counteroffensive. So Ukraine is back to square one, where they're having to build a brand new army from the ground up. Only this time, they don't have the most physically fit. They don't have the youngest, the people in their, 18, 19, 20, 21 who are, physically and mentally equipped to go to war. They're having to look for 16-year-olds and 60-year-olds. And that's a sign of collapse, not a sign of victory.
In this article in Financial Times, it doesn't mention the name of the guy, the Western official. It says that a Western official says that it's going to be a long fight, and Ukraine is now in the middle of it, which happens in every major conflict. Do you think Ukraine is in the middle of this battle, or what does it mean to get to the end?
Now, this Western official is engaged in wishful thinking and projection. They want to believe that this war is going to go on for a long time, they want to believe that it's, quote, a stalemate. It's not a stalemate. A stalemate implies you've got two forces on either side that are equally matched against each other, and one can't move the other. Russia has, by a deliberate strategy, avoided putting its forces at greater risk. They are content to fight primarily a defensive war. But in the course of this defensive war, they are grinding down, crushing, pulverizing the Ukrainian military. So at some point, Ukraine's ability to continue to fight and resist is going to collapse. It's at that point that Russia can strike and strike hard. So this official who believes this is going to go on for years, Ukraine doesn't have the manpower to go on for years. Ukraine does not have the money to go on for years. This is entirely dependent upon Washington to continue sending billions of dollars. And they've already sent $110 billion, which roughly represents about 12% of the total U.S. defense budget. I mean, it's an astronomical number. That is the number. We've sent as much money to Ukraine as Russia spends annually on its own national defense, or did. So it's completely out of touch with reality.
Yeah, U.S. State Department says that Putin wanted the glory of the Russian Empire. Do you think that they are looking for the Russian Empire? Is that based on reality, in your opinion?
No.
Why they're saying that?
Yeah. So when did this Russian Empire exist? We know about the British Empire, where they took colonial control of countries in Africa and in Asia. They dominated the world. We know that France, a colonial power, and it had an empire, again, enslaving states in Africa primarily, but also in Vietnam was a French colony. Russia's never had colonies outside of its borders. It had the Union of the Soviet Union reflected countries that were on the immediate borders of Russia that aligned themselves with the then Soviet Union over 100 years ago. So this is a Western canard. It's nonsense. It is, we ought to look in the mirror. The West needs to look in the mirror. They're the empire builders, not the Russians.
The other thing in this statement by the US State Department is that it says that Putin is begging Kim Jong-un for help for sending weapons to Russia. How did you find that?
Well, who was it 6 months ago that went to South Korea and begged them to sell us some artillery shells because we can no longer make them? That's right. It's Joe Biden. So again, this is just projection. Putin's decision to expand the relationship with North Korea. I mean, it's historically, going back to the Soviet Union, there's always been a good relationship between North Korea and Russia. So what Putin's doing now is he's creating another potential threat that the United States is going to have to worry about. It is now going to have to worry more about North Korea, as well as about China, as well as about Russia. So it's just, I think it's a deft move by the Russians and it's got the U.S., I think, a little off balance.
Telegraph reported that there is a major conflict between these mercenaries inside Ukraine. It seems that they're fighting each other. Who's managing these mercenaries?
Yeah, I think you've identified what the problem is. There's nobody in charge. I have listened to a couple of podcasts by two different individuals that one was a former U.S. law enforcement officer, another was a former Marine, who have served in Ukraine with these mercenary units. And they all tell very, very much the same story, which is, it's not like there's a formal place where you go sign up and they say, okay, we're going to assign you here because this is the people that need support. It's very haphazard, hit and miss. Do you know somebody that knows somebody who knows about a need out there? And it's very much like playing jazz music, improvisation.
Former aide to the Ukrainian president, Kuchma, he said that in the winter, there could be a revolution in Ukraine against Zelensky. How possible is that, in your opinion?
Well, I think it becomes more likely as support for Zelensky wanes, particularly overseas. So Zelensky's en route next week, I guess, to the United States, first to speak before the UN General Assembly, and then to go down to the White House to see sleepy Joe Biden. And, the odds that he's going to come away with, more weaponry and, increased support from the United States, I think is actually pretty slim. If he doesn't come away with it, it's going to accelerate his decline in Kiev, throughout Ukraine. If he does get some assurances of, oh yeah, we're not only giving you ATACMS, boy, those F-16s, they're showing up in 3 weeks. That may buy him some time, but everybody, the generals know what the situation is on the battlefield. If Ukraine was winning, we would know about it because the news media would be out there in mass, photographing it, celebrating because it's victory over Russia. And that hasn't happened.
Jerusalem Post didn't include Zelensky in its list of influential Jews in 2023. He was the second. He was the second in 2022. Now he disappeared from the list in 2023.
Yeah, the shine has come off that boy. I mean, before he was being touted as even better than Winston Churchill, and it was like, Abraham Lincoln, and put with these towering historical figures that actually had some accomplishments. And, here we got Volodymyr Zelensky, who's best known for his alleged use of cocaine and purchase of expensive properties overseas. So, it's not going to end well for him. He betrayed what he originally told the Ukrainian people. I mean, I remember back when he was running, and I thought this was hopeful. Finally, they got someone who's coming in who said he's going to make peace with Russia and they're going to stop the civil war in the Donbass. And I thought that'll be great. that'll be a real change. And he abandoned that promise. As a result of abandoning that promise, it's led to the deaths now of over 500,000, perhaps many as large as 600,000 Ukrainian soldiers.
Larry, in your opinion, why he didn't keep his promise to Ukrainians? It was because of corruption. It was he
Yeah.
was how
I think it's like remember that saying in The Godfather, you're going to make him an offer he can't refuse. He got an offer he couldn't refuse. I'm sure it involved some money. And then Mr. Kolomoisky, who'd played a central role in getting him into the presidency. I'm sure Kolomoisky came and said, "Hey, let me show you some, you need to turn here and do this and do that, and this support will come." And, I think Zelensky was enticed, and he now maybe is a growing realization he's been trapped. And I don't see how he gets out of this alive myself.
Did the Ukrainian hit a Russian base?
Yeah, in Sevastopol, they launched 10 drones, and apparently 2 or 3 got through. So it damaged a submarine and a landing craft, a ship that would land troops during an amphibious operation.
How do you see this operation? Do you think that it was done by NATO? It was done by Ukrainians?
Well, it's done by Ukrainians with NATO support and help, but they couldn't have done it without NATO. Which is, one of those. It's beginning, I think, to grate on the Russians that they've been far too tolerant of British and American support to Ukraine to carry out attacks that affect Russia. And they may very well start taking steps to punish both the United Kingdom and America for those acts.
I'm thinking of Putin. How this guy is thinking. He's not escalating this war. He's so conservative in carrying out this special military operation. In your opinion, how we can understand his manner in this war?
Well, he's not wanting to expand it if he can avoid it, because to do so would be terrible. Millions would die because it would start with attacks on the U.S. and NATO satellite systems. Russia would blind the West from being able to monitor real time what Russia's doing with its troop movements and with the locations of its ships and its airplanes. So right away, you expand the war that way. It very well could end up with attacks on American cities, because America certainly will respond by, even before Russia would attack American cities, America will have, with the United Kingdom, probably attack some cities in Russia and cause Russian casualties. So this thing could spiral out of control very quickly. And that's what Putin, I think, has been wanting to avoid, that he's hoping that he can contain Ukraine to the point that Ukraine will be forced to either surrender or come in and negotiate terms that Russia is going to dictate. This is not going to be a situation where Russia gives up and surrenders its position. Not at all. Not a chance.
It's so important for Russia. It's not something tiny. It's not far from Russia. It's at the doorstep of Russia. How they can be defeated in this war? It's impossible. I don't know what they're thinking of.
But it's the kind of thing. In theory, if the West could somehow put together a 2 to 3 million man army and deploy that army to Poland and to Romania, and ensure that they had the air protection as well as supply trucks to ferry gasoline forward to keep the tank columns moving, maybe in that sort of situation, they still wouldn't have a chance to win, but it would create a much more serious threat akin to what Russia experienced in World War II. So this is part of it is just the failure of the American leadership to wake up and accept the reality of what the world has become and how warfare has changed.
One of the most important countries in Europe supporting Ukraine in this war was Poland, and it's still Poland. It seems that they're not happy with Ukraine, with these agricultural products going to Poland. Just yesterday, Duda, the president of Poland, said that they're not supporting Ukraine entry to NATO. It's about the time. It's not a good time for them to be part of NATO. How do you see this?
Well, and not only that, but you also note that Poland's blocking Ukrainian agricultural exports as well. So, close allies, no. They've done some, verbal support for each other, but that hasn't necessarily translated into a lot of concrete actions. I think you've had several thousand Polish volunteers that have died in Ukraine. And some of them have been online complaining that they were promised they'd get $400,000 if they fought. And they're not, the fact that they believed it and went without a signed contract and without any kind of financial deposit is creating some additional anger among those Poles who served in Ukraine and towards their former Ukrainian partners. So this is, I think Poland's still going to do what's in Poland's best interest. And that means if it has to confiscate territory that Ukraine currently claims as its own that once was Polish territory, I think the Poles will do it. They'll go get it.
In this G20 summit, Putin and Xi didn't participate. And,
right.
And how did you find this? Why, in your opinion, they didn't participate in this G20 summit?
It's no longer an important forum, not worth their time. I mean, that because 2 weeks before they had BRICS, and in BRICS you got countries lining up to join. You don't have countries lining up to join G20. The entire purpose of the G20 is basically solidify America's control over the international economic system. And, China and Russia are saying, no, we're not going to play that game anymore. We're done. So it is, the group is largely irrelevant.
In 2022, in G20 Summit 2022, they put Russian aggression in Ukraine in the final statement of this. And in 2023, despite Putin and Xi not participating in this summit, they couldn't do that.
Yeah, well, they blocked it.
In your opinion?
Well, they blocked it, and the others, Saudi Arabia, I think, blocked it. So you had other countries, Brazil. They weren't wanting to go down that road because G20 is supposed to be an economic forum. So you gather people together to talk about policy, about trade, monetary policy, taxation. And instead, the United States is trying to turn it into a political animal. And they're just let's call it the Southern, those from the global South are just not having any more of it. They're saying, no, we're not going to do that. Same with India.
It seems to me that for China and Russia, India, even Brazil, if you zoom out from Ukraine, you're going to see a bigger picture. This conflict in Ukraine is one of them. In Taiwan, is part of this confrontation between G7 and BRICS.
I've been saying now for more than a year, this is a fundamental change. It's a watershed moment in history where we're seeing the end of U.S. global hegemony and the rise of new competitors that will offset and in some cases surpass anything the U.S. can do. So up to this point, the United States has been able to threaten other countries. If you don't do what we want, we're going to impose sanctions on you. Well, a lot of countries are getting sick and tired of that threat. And so they're now looking to alternatives. That's why I posted the other day on my blog at Sonar 21 this image from I think it was from Beijing. So on the one side of this mall, you had the Huawei store selling its brand new phone, and the store was packed, mobbed. Then literally across the hallway, a door down, was the Apple Store. And there were hardly any people in that. So, and I think you're going to see a trend where there'll be fewer Chinese buying Apple products, which is going to hurt Apple economically. So now all of a sudden, the U.S. ability to go out and use our threats about, withholding the dollar, seizing your assets, people are saying, screw you. We're not going to put up with that anymore. We're going to go our own way, which is what's happening.
Larry, you wrote an article on your website. It was so amazing about Putin. Could you describe your point in this article for us?
Well, David Petraeus, former four-star general, had been recorded saying, he did an interview, I think it was either with Financial Times or Daily Telegraph, one of those in the UK. And in it, he stated very clearly that, the Ukrainians, they're fighting for freedom. They know what they're fighting for. The Russians, they don't know what they're fighting for. And it just reflected a level of ignorance about how the Russians view foreign invaders. And I made the point in that piece that, every May, Russia, there's the March of the Immortals. And what this is the family members whose grandfathers, great-grandfathers, or fathers, uncles, mothers, who fought in the Great Patriotic War, the war in World War II. These people come out with their pictures in March. There were 27 million people that died in that war, estimated, maybe more. So almost every person in the Soviet Union had a family member, knew somebody who had died. So Russia knows exactly what it's fighting for. And then Putin's discussion with these kids on the first day of school, kids, I mean, they're teenagers. They were sort of mesmerized listening to his story as he described how his grandfather, held his grandmother who had been shot as she died. And their last words they exchanged before she passed. And, that's just one man. You can't name for me the last president who had a relative that died in World War II, World War I, Civil War. That the United States, thankfully, has not been touched by this massive amount of loss of life like what Russia has experienced over the course of the last 80 years. And Putin remembers.